Now, for some unknown reason, this is the presentation I'm most looking forward to. So we're going to have a session here that talks about one of the most shocking financial fraud cases in recent histories, and I hope I say this right, the Finablr fraud. And Chris Thomas, the group manager, internal audit of Tredios Bank, is going to take us through this. Now, the reason why I find this the most fascinating one, because Chris is an internal audit. Now, normally when I mention the word internal audit, people's eyelids just shut down and take a rest. But yet, in my introduction speech, which I've given, it says he has a fresh human approach to audit. And that is what most fascinates me about this speech. So it's not about the case, it's about the fresh human approach to internal audit. Chris, please take the floor.
Thank you. Thanks for your kind words, David. I was just going to say that's the AI bit writing there and not me, but yeah. Hello everyone. Let's start. Everybody here knows what fraud is, but perhaps very few of you have ever had a fraud impact their lives so profoundly that you and your families had to relocate countries and start your lives all over again, not once, but twice. This is the story of how a fintech giant was brought to its knees by the greed of a few men. But this is also the story of how an Indian boy who was raised on an island in the Middle East moved to the grand city of Dubai to pursue his dreams, only to find himself having to move to Amsterdam shortly after to restart his life. And now, 5 years later, gets to stand in one of the oldest and the most prestigious financial institutions of the world to tell you his story of redemption over the impact of this fraud. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Chris Thomas. This is the story of the Finablr fraud, but this is also my story. So let's start at the very beginning. An interesting fact, that is a picture of the Kingdom of Bahrain. Now, Bahrain is a small island in the Persian Gulf, nestled happily between Saudi Arabia and Qatar. It's an oil-rich nation, and the Bahraini dinar is the second strongest currency in the world. That is all of Bahrain. That's 1.3 million lives playing out before you through the window of an aeroplane. I know it because I took it. And so it is into this small but beautiful island that I found myself born into in 1986. My parents, Thomas and Elsa, were first-generation Indian expatriates who had moved to Bahrain in the early 80s. For my brothers and I, growing up in an Indian first-generation expatriate household meant that the virtue of resilience was almost a given. Study hard, work with honor, and ensure that the only thing standing between yourself and success is an opportunity. That used to be the mantra every day. This mindset helped me complete 8 glorious years in internal and external audit in Deloitte. But it really wasn't until 2016 when I got into a senior audit leadership role in Travelex Bahrain that I started to understand that the true value of audit was not in critiquing, so to your point, David, but in providing clarity. And thus, my true purpose was born when I started to bring my human approach to every audit that I did, to help my stakeholders understand risks with clarity from an emotionally intelligent level. Now, naturally, this brought about a lot of success, and my manager soon informed me that there was an opportunity to move to Dubai for 2 main reasons. One being that Travelex's regional head office in the Middle East was in Dubai. And the other one, which is the most critical one, and this is where my timeline now intertwines with Finablr's, Travelex at the time was being purchased by a fintech group called Finablr based out of Abu Dhabi. the Travelex Chief Audit Executive was being selected for the same role at Finablr. Now, me being in Dubai offered a great strategic advantage to be considered for a senior leadership role in the Finablr audit function, given that I would be in Dubai. And so, with the bags of Bahrain on our backs and the dreams of Finablr in our eyes, my wife Jewel and I left Bahrain and moved to the vibrant city of Dubai in 2018. And now's the perfect time to get into Finablr's story. Dr. B.R. Shetty, much like my father, was a first-generation Indian expatriate who had moved to Abu Dhabi in the late 70s. Known as the man with the silver tongue, he first found entrepreneurial success in the pharmaceutical industry. This led him into the healthcare industry, which was booming in the 80s and 90s in the Middle East. And so he started NMC Healthcare. Now, NMC Healthcare went on to spawn into a huge healthcare giant which at its peak boasted of 20,000 plus medical staff, 3,000 plus medical doctors operating out of 25 countries and more in Europe, Middle East, Asia and Africa. But NMC's true crowning glory came in 2012 when it was listed on the London Stock Exchange. And here's a fact. NMC was the first Middle Eastern homegrown healthcare company to be listed on the London Stock Exchange. Now, being listed on the LSE gave NMC and its management board access to a wide investor base, including the FTSE 100 Investor Index. It also tremendously boosted their reliability and credibility amongst investors and, more importantly, lenders. Dr. Shetty, meanwhile, had slowly forayed into the financial services industry in the early 80s by first purchasing UAE Exchange and turning it into a massive remittance and forex powerhouse in the Middle East. He then went on to purchase Travelex in 2018 for a reported sum of $1 billion in 2018. 9 other fintech companies and similar companies were bought and acquired over a period of time, and all 11 companies were consolidated under the brand name Finablr, which is a wordplay on enabling finance. A very interesting and very pivotal side note over here is that the management at Finablr was largely made up of the management at UAE Exchange, long-term associates and friends of Dr. Shetty's, with the CEO, Pramoth Mangat, being the CEO at UAE Exchange, promoted as the CEO of Finablr. Finablr went in NMC's footsteps, and in 2019, it was listed on the London Stock Exchange, and again, it was the first Middle Eastern homegrown fintech to be listed on the London Stock Exchange at an initial trading price of 175 pence per share. Meanwhile, I was being asked to lead and run multiple strategic initiatives to help integrate and to help set up Finablr's internal audit function in Abu Dhabi. And so the dream, my friends, was well and truly on. Until in 2019, December, Muddy Waters, the famous American short seller, came out with a report stating that NMC's financial statements were grossly misstated and that they contained undisclosed liabilities. It also went on to question the independence of the NMC governance board, and it went on to claim that NMC had indeed falsified documentations at the time of listing. Now, naturally, this triggered a lot of investigation, and eventually it came out that NMC had, in fact, undisclosed liabilities to the tune of $6.6 billion in its balance sheet. This triggered a massive collapse in the share prices. $1 billion was wiped out literally overnight of the market cap. NMC fell from grace and it was delisted off the LSE. Now, in the wake of the Finablr, the NMC scandal, Muddy Waters came out with another report stating that Finablr, NMC's sister concern, also had undisclosed liabilities. This triggered a flurry of internal and external investigations, the most famous of which being that executed by Kroll and Houlihan Lokey. In a very strange turn of events, as soon as these two reports came out from Muddy Water, Dr. Shetty, the CEO of NMC, Prashant Mangat, and his brother, the CEO of Finablr, Pramod Mangat, the CFOs, and a few other senior execs fled the scene from the UAE and flew to India. It blew the conspiracy wide open, in my view. After extensive investigations, in March 2020, it was revealed that Finablr also had undisclosed liabilities, and this time to the tune of $1.3 billion US. Finablr was eventually delisted off the LSE. Shares fell, market cap fell, Finablr fell. The dream, my friends, was well and truly done. Further investigations revealed that Finablr's shareholders, including Dr. Shetty, had pledged their shares in Travelex and UA Exchange, the two big cash cows or the flagship brands, if you want to call it that. They had pledged their shares in Travelex and UA Exchange as collaterals for these loans that they had taken at Finablr. Now, this had immediate impact on Travelex and UA Exchange, both of whom immediately went into a period of administration and restructuring. Finablr's assets, once valued at over $2 billion US, was sold to a private investor for $1. It's a true story, hit it up online. 17,000 employees worked at both Travelex and UA Exchange at the time. 60% of these employees are people who earn a net monthly salary of euro 800 and below. Months of salary cuts ensued, with eventual terminations, layoffs, or relocations of staff between countries and branches. I myself was made redundant and formally fired by Travelex on August 31st, 2020, bang in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. True justice has been delayed and denied to this day. What once was trading at 175 pence per share fell to near zero, and no formal restitution has been made to the investors to this day. $7.9 billion, 6.6 at NMC and 1.3 at Finablr. $7.9 billion in undisclosed liabilities taken from a consortium of 85 plus financial institutions. $7.9 billion is 4 times the price of Wirecard's missing funds. And no one knows where the money is to this day. Civil and criminal litigations continue to haunt Dr. Shetty and the execs who fled the scene of crime that day. But no formal conclusions to these litigations and no formal financial restitutions have been made or reclamations have been made from them to this day. Now, naturally, for a fraud of this scale and size to be perpetrated, all lines of governance had to fail in some form or the other. And in the case of Finablr, that's exactly what happened. It failed spectacularly. Now, a small caveat over here is this analysis is made on research that I did from investigative reports available on this subject, but also based on interviews that I conducted with key management personnel at Finablr, Travelex, and UA Exchange. So while some of this might be viewed as conjecture, in the spirit that there is very little smoke without fire, let's get into it. Investigative reports revealed a heavy nature of collusion at the highest levels of governance at Finablr. If you remember, I had told you that Finablr's management was made up largely of UA Exchange's management. It was no secret that in UA Exchange there existed a very deeply entrenched nature of yes-man culture. Now this culture flew into Finablr, found its way there, and enabled senior managers over at Finablr, who were also employees at UA Exchange, it enabled them to override critical management controls, especially around the loans and payments process. The eerily similar nature of frauds conducted at NMC and Finablr, both led by brothers Pramod and Prashant Mangat, the CEOs, also just made it even more weirder. But the death knell on this speculation was when Dr. Shetty, the two CEOs, and those senior executives fled the scene of the crime. Compliance and risk got a little bit of flack. In fact, they got quite a bit of flack. I need to revise my words, but they got a lot of flack for not having enough rigor. And risk management was criticized heavily for not applying proper controls around the payments process, not reviewing the mergers and acquisitions process at Finablr, not properly reviewing the listings process, and looking at the loans process. Compliance got a lot of criticism for not looking and properly identifying suspicious transactions around the wires that were obtained from these loans and then processed afterwards as payments. They were also criticized for not challenging effectively the validity of documentation that was provided at listing. Now, internal audit was dealt with in an extremely strange manner as per my interviews and of course as per the reports. The Travelex Chief Audit Executive was not made the Finablr Chief Audit Executive up until the last week prior to listing. That too, without a formal Finablr contract or a formal Finablr audit charter. When the NMC scandals hit, internal audit began a series of investigations only to find that the doors of both Travelex and UA Exchange were shut to them, restricting the nature and scope of their investigations. The final, most weird thing with internal audit was that just a few weeks into their investigations, under the pretext of restructuring, the Chief Audit Executive and 75% of the internal audit team was abruptly fired. A controversial point was raised in the investigation reports around former Ernst & Young partners who were independent directors at NMC, who were then appointed as independent directors at Finablr, with one gentleman even being the chair of its Audit and Risk Committee. Now, this raised a heavy level of speculation into the potential conflicts of interests and also the potential influence these gentlemen may have had on the engagement auditors of both Finablr and NMC, which was Ernst & Young. Now, the fact that Ernst & Young failed to identify over $8 billion in undisclosed liabilities in both books of accounts just further widened and added fuel to the speculation. The regulators were not spared in these investigation reports. They also got criticized for not acting timely and fast enough as soon as the red flags came and as soon as the Muddy Waters report hit. They were also criticized for not really reviewing the financial statements and other listing documentations properly prior to listing these companies. Governance, in every sense of the word, had failed Finablr. Now, upon hearing all of this, I'm sure all of you are having similar thoughts, questions, doubts, and fears that I had when I first faced this reality. From being the youngest regional audit manager in Travelex's 40-year history, primed for more success and potential success at Finablr, just to have it all come crashing down around me like a house of cards. That is the devastating impact of fraud. From years of facing problems head-on with purpose and resilience, to feeling weak confused, afraid, not knowing who to turn to, not knowing where to go. That is the disempowering impact of fraud. From being invested in the mission, ethos, and the prospect of what Finablr promised, only to come upon the cynical realization that it was all a pack of lies and deceit, sold to you like a mirage in the desert. That is the disillusioning impact of fraud. Now, some of you may know this, but in expatriates, residency status in the Middle East is often linked to the employment visa that is provided by their employers. And what this meant for me and my wife was as soon as Travelex fired me, the both of us faced the very serious prospect of having to leave Dubai, a city that we'd come to with so much hopes and dreams. Devastated, disempowered, disillusioned, my wife and I faced a very profound question: what next? As I was preparing for this event, I came across a very beautiful quote written by my friend Ajay, who's sitting over here, by the way. The most beautiful symphonies are often written in the looming shadows of likely failure. If I look back at my life and what transpired in the wake of the Finablr fraud, this couldn't be more truer. If you remember, I told you that I was fired officially from Travelex on August 31st, 2020. And yet, one day before, on August 30th, 2020, I received a formal offer letter in hand and an invitation from an asset manager based here in the Netherlands to join their internal audit team. This company goes by the name of Kofra. Some of you may recognize them also as Anthos. And the rest, as this beautiful collage suggests, is history. And when I think about the series of events that led me from Dubai to Amsterdam, there are three things that stand out for my wife and I. Though devastated, our purpose gave us the will to rise against our circumstance. Though disempowered, our resilience gave us the strength to stand, and this is the most important thing. Though disillusioned, our faith in God anchored our integrity, reminding us to honor what was right despite everything that seemed lost. And that's why, for me, integrity is the core of who we are as people and as professionals. And for that very reason, integrity is the beating heart of the control environment. It would be an extremely controversial statement for me to make, but the men who perpetrated the Finablr fraud had the clarity of purpose and the strength of the resilience to carry it out. But what they lacked was the integrity to recognize or to care even about the intended and unintended consequences of their actions. And that's why, for me, integrity is more than just a value. Integrity is a choice to question, a choice to challenge, and a choice to do the right thing even when it is not easy to do. Integrity is more than just the frameworks, policies, and controls that we have on paper in our organizations. It is about the decisions we make when no one's watching. It is about the moments that define our very humanity. And so, my dear friends, as the sun sets on this beautiful financial crime conference, I leave you with this one thought. Integrity asks everything of you: to rise, to stand, to honor. Not just when it's easy, but especially when it isn't. Integrity is the access point to greatness, the compass that guides through the unknown. Integrity is the power to be unbreakable, and in that power, the world finds its way to you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm running away from questions. I don't think anyone has any questions. No questions, guys.
I told you it was worth it. I only met Chris this morning at coffee, and I immediately knew that was going to be a standout.